I just want to talk about what happened in the English Channel. 4 people dead, the freezing waters, the dark, the phone call that was made in the early hours of the morning. I mean, it's impossible not to look at the details and be very moved by it. What would Labour do?
You're right. When we talk about the details, when you hear about what happened, it's horrific. There's no other word for it. It's truly, deeply upsetting and awful to hear what happened. And I think it really it should be a wake-up call. It really underscores the fact that we need to do something about people who are being smuggled by people traffickers, by criminal gangs across the Channel. Now, we know that there's been a lot of discussion about this in the media and so on, and in Parliament. And we've been saying for a long time that rather than spend money on things like the Rwanda policy, which we think is unethical and unworkable, that money would be better spent beefing up the capacity of the National Crime Agency to go after the criminal gangs who are smuggling these people in the first place.
It's easier said than done, though, isn't it? If it was easy to break up the people with traffickers, then, yeah, any government would do that, wouldn't they? I mean, I just look at what Interpol says on that. There's a relatively low risk of detection, prosecution and arrest compared to other activities of transnational organised crime. And it's because the relationship between the criminals and the migrants is a temporary one. So the criminals are really hard to trace. They're unknown to the people they're smuggling. They hide behind pseudonyms. They use rental vehicles, different mobile numbers. I mean, if Labour's not going to be able to just bang a bit more money to the National Crime Agency and suddenly it's all going to be sorted.
Well, hard problems are what government has to deal with. Hard problems, whether it's what we're discussing now or the really other big issues like the climate emergency or all of the other challenges that we face. It is government's job, ultimately, to take on these difficult issues. And yes, it's not the case of just snapping your fingers and making things go right. It does require hard work, focus, rolling up your sleeves, sitting down at the table, making sure that you're really delivering the programme that you talk about. And, it is one of the wider problems, not just in relation to this issue, but across the piece. So the government, members of the Conservative Party, are so distracted by their own internal party politics within Parliament and trying to hang on to their jobs and doing all of their horse trading and worried about rebellions here and there. They're not focused on delivering the job, which is tackling the really big issues we face.
Let's focus on what Labour would do. Would you open more routes to people to claim asylum legally in the UK? Because obviously one of the issues is that there aren't very many safe and legal routes if you're not from one of the sort of designated countries that has them, like Hong Kong, Ukraine and Afghanistan. Would you like to see it easier for people to claim asylum?
So we need to make some really important changes around, for instance, replacing the Dublin Agreement, making sure that that is there for safe reunions, family reunions, and so on. I think the other part of the equation, which is really important as well, though, is to make sure that when people are in the UK, their applications are processed fairly but speedily. And this is one of the really big problems.
Getting to the UK, isn't it? That's the thing, because at the minute it's you can't get to the UK in a safe and legal route, right? If you're going to only be able to claim asylum when you're in the UK, that's why you come over on a small boat.
Exactly, and that's one of the problems that the Home Secretary, found very difficult at the recent hearing that the Home Secretary had. She wasn't able to explain how the policies which the Conservatives are proposing would help people to make applications and safe routes into the country. And what we know is that you need those safe and legal routes, but you also need to make sure that you have the investment here so that the asylum applications can be processed in a fair and quick way. Because, at the moment, if we see people in hotel accommodation for months, years on end, that's bad for the people involved. It racks up the bill in terms of paying for all that accommodation, and it's bad for the overall system.
OK. We've just heard from Pat Cullen of the Royal College of Nursing saying that if there isn't a resolution, then we can expect strikes continuing into the new year, into January, which obviously is going to be desperate news for the NHS and it's already under pressure. Nurses have said they want a pay rise that's 5% above inflation. Is that affordable?
Well, as the Shadow Secretary of State for Health and others in the opposition have said, that 19%, is not going to be affordable. But the point is, there should be a negotiation about avoiding these strikes going ahead, about coming to a resolution. And, if you take a step back and think how the government have behaved in relation to the nurses and other NHS workers, and indeed different sectors across the economy and across the public sector, the government have not been willing to negotiate. They have stepped back. They have let these problems develop or go without the solution. And actually, as I said in response to one of your earlier questions, the job of government is to roll up your sleeves and try and sort out difficult problems. And this is a difficult problem, but it is one where we believe the government should roll up their sleeves, get to the negotiating table and avoid these strikes that no one wants to see happen. The nurses don't want them to go ahead.
Would you like to see the Labour government in Wales do that then as well, where there's also strikes going on?
Well, we want to see across the country strikes averted, and the point is the way
so Mark Drakeford should do a bit more then.
Well, look, the way that you avert strikes is to negotiate with trade unions, with workers' representatives, and try and get a deal, because no one wants strikes to go ahead. The nurses do not want to go on strike. No one in any industry wants to go on strike, and the public don't want to see the strikes either. And it really is the job of government. Rather than standing back, rather than giving up because it's too hard, rather than threatening, new legislation to, as they would see it, deal with the problem, they need to roll up their sleeves, sit down at their table and negotiate a solution.
Well, I guess the government would say they've said what the offer is, because they're going to go along with the pay review body, which is around 4% for most nurses. So what would Labour's position be then?
So ultimately, it is the responsibility of government to find a solution.
Yeah,
so it's the responsibility of the government to sit down at that table.
You're the government in waiting. What would be a fair pay rise for nurses? Would it be 7.5% like they've accepted in Scotland? Well,
the point of having a negotiation is that you have that negotiation to work out what the pay deal is and what the other terms of an agreement are.
But if you're in opposition, you could put a bit of pressure on the government by saying what your position would be.
The position that we're putting the pressure on the government to do is to negotiate, is to get around the table, is to roll up their sleeves and do the difficult but critical work of government, which is to come to a solution. And that's how we would avert strikes, and that's how we'd make sure that the health service is a better position. But if I can just say one other point, which is really important, which is that the health service has been run down. It's been run down for 12 years, and pay is a really important issue, but it's also a lack of staff. There's real problems with recruitment and retention, which is why we proposed the biggest expansion of the NHS workforce in its history, funded by scrapping the non-dom tax status.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme today, explaining some of Labour's proposals, James Murray.